Welcome everyone to MarshWatch number 7. This is the 6th ID session that we're doing. I hope you are excited for Wetland Wednesday, because I sure am. Before we get started, I'd just like to say welcome. Today is solstice. It is also Indigenous Peoples Day in Canada. And I'd just like to say that I'm joining you today from Saskatoon, which is located on Treaty 6 territory, and it encompasses the traditional territory of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Saulteaux, Stoney First Nations, as well as the homeland of the Métis people. My name is Leanne Latramoy, and I work for an organization called Birds Canada. We're a nonprofit with a mission to drive action to increase the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of birds in Canada. So hopefully with a program like this, we're achieving all of those three. At the very least, we're going to be learning about birds and hopefully appreciating them a little bit more. I do seriously love wetlands, and it's just a snapshot of me over time in various wetland situations. So on the agenda, we're just going to be covering some birds this week. And then afterwards, I'm going to let you know about the bird walk that we're doing in Minnedosa this coming Sunday. And then we'll get on to the quizzes and any questions or discussions that you might have. All right. So who are we covering today? This is a little bit of a challenging one today because we've got a few species that are kind of tough to tell apart. So this is why we're only covering some birds, not doing any amphibians this week. So we've got both the Marsh Wren and the Sedge Wren. We've got the common Yellowthroat, the northern Harrier, which is the only raptor we're going to be covering because it is a marsh-dwelling raptor. We also have the common and Forster's terns, as well as the Willet and the marbled Godwit. Okay, let's dive right in, shall we? So first up, we have the Sedge Wren. This is a very small little brown bird. Wrens typically have, a slightly curved bill. It's a pointy bill, but it's slightly curved. And a lot of them have kind of this stiff tail that they'll often, hold up, much like the reddy duck we were talking about last week. They'll hold that stiff tail up in a variety of positions. It's generally a compact bird, kind of has a biggish head for its kind of relatively small body. And both the sexes look the same, and it's going to be this kind of pale, buffy, or straw colored overall, and it's going to be heavily barred above. So it's going to be heavily barred on the wings, the tail, and it's going to have a streaked back. There is a little bit of a faint eyebrow, but it doesn't contrast very much with the rest of the bird's face. It kind of just blends in. So especially if you're seeing this tiny little bird at a distance, the eyebrow stripe isn't going to be something that jumps out. It will on the Marsh Wren, however. So for our Sedge Wren, just a small bird that's going to have, quite a bit of barring. If you're thinking you might get this confused with a sparrow, sparrows have kind of a short conical shaped bill, good for crunching seeds. They do that especially in the fall and the winter season. But the wren is going to have a little bit more of a pointed bill, again, slight curve to it. You're going to find the Sedge Wren in these kind of dense, sedgy, grassy margins of wetlands, in wet meadows and hay fields. This is one of the wetland habitats that's actually quite a bit under threat, in part because, in the drier years, it's really easy if you're, cropping an area to just start to, crop into that wetland margin. And so it's these kind of marginal species that, we tend to lose a fair bit of that habitat because it's a lot easier to, manipulate and change. So they do like that kind of edge of that wetland, or again, those wet meadow areas, anywhere that's going to be really kind of dense, grassy, but also moist. So the soil is going to be moist in that area. They'll also use drawn down wetlands, and there is going to be some habitat overlap with the Marsh Wren. You can find Sedge Wrens in a little bit wetter environments as well, especially if there is none of that, kind of grassy area left in a wetland. These guys eat a lot of insects and spiders, and they'll do so by hopping around the vegetation. They're quite the little acrobats, and they'll kind of, just pick little bits of prey off the vegetation and off the ground. Wrens are interesting because when they nest, they tend to like to build a lot of dummy nests, especially the Sedge Wren and the Marsh Wren. So they'll build these kind of globe-shaped nests, out of rushes, cattails, grasses, and they'll build multiple. And it's not totally known why they build multiple. It might be the male going, hey, look at all of look at all of my wares, look at all of these beautiful nests that I'm able to build. It also might be a little bit of a predator deterrent, and it probably, serves both of those functions. Wrens are very, very busy birds. They will be calling, pretty much at all hours of the day. So it's not one of those, early morning species. Of course, they're going to be going in the early morning, but they'll be going at nighttime. They'll be going midday. There seems to be a little part of the evening where they quiet down, but otherwise they're a fairly active little bird, and that the males do sing quite a bit. And Marsh Wren and Sedge Wren are going to sound a little bit similar at first, but if you get practiced with them, they can sound quite a fair bit different. So the Sedge Wren is going to be overall more kind of just mechanical sounding. It's going to have a bit of a rattle, so it's going to have a couple of intro notes and then this harsh sewing machine rattle, kind of like a and instead of just me doing that with my voice, let's play the sound. So it's going to have that, kind of harsh, not very musical at all. And in the repetitions, it's going to sound really similar in between the same bird's calls. And the marsh wren is going to be a little bit different in that regard, but really it's going to be a harsh, couple of intro notes and then much more quicker notes that kind of make a rattle. And I just think of a sewing machine going in the marsh. And this is a species that you are far more likely to hear than to see. And if you do see it, often it's only, very, very briefly and as a small, tiny little bird flying somewhere in a marsh. So this is one where it really pays to know what the bird sounds like. Of course, it's always nice to know what they look like in case you do get a good look at it, but it is a tough species to get to see very well. Got a decent distribution in the breeding season, so we're going to be seeing it just kind of in the edge in Alberta, but we'll get them through Saskatchewan and through Manitoba as well as southern Ontario. So the closely related marsh wren, this is another small wren. It's got a little bit longer bill compared to our sedge wren, and it's going to be this kind of darker, warm brown overall as compared to that sedge wren, which was really kind of pale straw colored. So kind of this rusty brown overall. Remember we talked about that eyebrow stripe on the sedge wren that doesn't contrast with the rest of the face? And the marsh wren, you can definitely see that white eyebrow contrasts with the rest of the overall dark face, a bit of a dark crown there. So that eyebrow stripe does stand out, and it's going to be less heavily barred overall. So you're going to see this kind of plain patch on the upper wing right here. This is what I'm pointing to on the left hand side over here. So it's going to have a plain kind of rusty brownish patch on the upper wing, that bold eyebrow. There's going to be some barring on the wings and the tail, but overall there's kind of less white on it overall, and definitely kind of a richer, warmer brown color. And again, similarly to the marsh wren, it's often going to have its tail up. They're quite acrobatic. They're quite active little birds. Here's a photograph of a marsh wren nest. So you're going to find these ones oftentimes in deeper wetlands. They will preferentially build in cattail, but as the summer goes on and the water draws down, you'll find them more into the bulrush. They also glean prey off of vegetation in the ground, and because they have a slightly more aquatic habitat, they'll definitely nest in deeper water marshes compared to the sedge wren. In addition to insects and spiders, they'll also snack on any aquatic insects that they can get a hold of. A lot of small birds will they're really kind of versatile in terms of small little animal critters that they'll eat. So, most of the time, if it fits, they will eat it. So as I mentioned, you'll find these guys in slightly deeper wetlands. Often you'll be looking for stands of cattail and bulrush. Tends to be deeper water than areas with sedge wren, but there is absolutely overlap. And I have been in many marsh situations before where you have both species kind of in the same general area. So just, keep that in mind. That habitat distinction, while it's even in the name, isn't a hard and fast rule, especially as, in dry years where the water table is a fair bit lower, you might still have cattail growing, but you've got sedge wrens moved into that area. And even if there is a bit of water, you'll still find some sedge wrens on occasion. So Just keep that in mind. It's a good place to start in your head, but don't use it as a hard and fast rule. It's another one that builds lots of those really cool little globe-shaped nests. And here you can see in the bottom left-hand corner a marsh wren at a little bit of a distance, and that eyebrow stripe, that white, contrasts with the rest of the face. And if I saw that at a distance, I would know that that was a marsh wren, and that's primarily based on that eyebrow stripe. But again, this is another one that you're mostly going to just be hearing. For those of you who joined me in Regina this past weekend, we were at a nice little wetland and we had a whole bunch of marsh wrens going in the distance, but we did not see any. There might have been one. There was a small bird that at one point got up and flew away, but there's no telling what that is other than you knew it was a fairly small brownish bird. It could have been a number of species. So in contrast to the sedge wren, they have a kind of variable gurgling rattle. It's, if you know the sound of the house wren, it's along the lines of that. It's more bubbly, it's more musical, and it's actually variable between marsh wren, songs, if you will, of the same individual. So, you'll sing one version, pause a few seconds, sing another version that sounds slightly different. So there's more change in the song, whereas the sedge wren is really similar from song to song. Let's play that kind of variable gurgling rattle for you, and I think there's a few going in this recording. No, just the one. It also almost sounds to me like they're taking a bit of a breath. There's a little note at the start of kind of each of those segments that are strung fairly closely together. It kind of sounds like they take a deep breath before. So there's a little bit of an intro, but it's not quite like the sedge wren where it has 2 to 3 click click tick, 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 notes. So I'll play that variable gurgling rattle again. I know sometimes, that distinction is kind of tough, like more mechanical or more musical sounding, but the more you get your ear practice, the more something like this will start to make sense to you. So the best thing you can do is get out into a wetland and start listening to these species. Marsh wren also has quite a wide distribution, a fair bit wider than the sedge wren, and you're going to be seeing it in a fair bit of Canada as well as into the US. Okay, let's take a look at those two wrens side by side. Again, for our marsh wren, we've got that nice white eyebrow, that bold eyebrow contrasts with the rest of the face. The sedge wren, while there is a bit of a paler eyebrow, it doesn't contrast with the rest of the face as strongly. You're not drawn to it necessarily. There's a rusty patch on the wings of the marsh wren that's not barred, whereas the sedge wren has a fair bit more streaking and barring all over the back and the wings. Generally speaking, marsh wrens prefer deeper water habitat, whereas sedge wrens tend to prefer shallower, marshy, grassy areas. Again, that gurgling rattle for the marsh wren and this kind of sewing machine rattle for the sedge wren. Let's play those calls again. And here's our sedge wren one last time. So again, that, much more harsh. It's not very bubbly or gurgly. Okay, and those are our two marsh-dwelling wren species. All right, someone who's bold, someone who's easy to identify, at least the male. This is our common yellowthroat. This is a pretty small warbler, and as all warblers, they're very, very active little species. Unless they're singing, they don't really sit still for more than a second or two. They tend to bounce around and be very active little birds. Somewhat secretive, like most warblers can be. These guys also inhabit a lot of different types of habitat, but especially marshy habitats, and in that they can be quite secretive. They have a small pointed little bill, And the males have this really cute little black bandit mask. It's edged above in white, and they've got this nice bright yellow throat and breast. The back is kind of this, olivey brownish color. There's a little bit of a yellow wash to the tail, but really the thing that stands out on this little bird is that, that solid black little mask. There isn't anything that's going to look like the male common yellowthroat. So that one's a pretty easy species to identify by looks. And it does actually sing a fair bit. And it sings kind of either a witchy, 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 or a witchety, witchety, witchety. And it can do that kind of 3.5 to 4 times. So sometimes that last syllable is just a witch. So it can be witchety, 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 witch, or just a witchety, 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 witchety. And kind of variations on that theme, but usually somewhere between 3.5 to 4 times, sometimes 3 on that either witchety or witchy call. So I'll play the song here. And this is going to be a fairly common song that you're going to hear, as you're birding along wetlands. You'll find them in, a variety of kind of brushy habitats, especially near wet areas. The female, on the other hand, she's a fair bit more drab. So she's going to be overall kind of a drab olive brown. She's going to have varying amounts of white on her throat. Varying amounts of yellow on her throat, and sometimes it can almost appear white. Sometimes, you really can't see very much of the yellow hue to it, especially because, they're kind of secretive, so you don't always have the best lighting. The throat does contrast, whether it's, kind of pale or very yellow. It does contrast with the rest of the plain darker face that has a single eye ring around it. So otherwise, there's not a whole lot going on that little face. There's no wing bars. It's a very plain looking bird overall, that little female. And this is another one that's going to eat similar things. It's going to be gleaning prey off of vegetation and the ground, and it's going to be eating insects and spiders. You'll find them in dense, low vegetation, primarily wetlands, but I have seen them in moist grassland areas and coulees. So kind of in, patches of snowberries on a pasture. And I was blown away. I'd never encountered them before. To me, they were strictly wetland species, but as it turns out, in some of the grassland habitats, they'll make use of, lower lying shrub areas. So that was new to me. I learned that the last couple of years. The common yellowthroat has a wide distribution in Canada and the US, as well as into Mexico. So if you are birding anywhere in Canada that you're, mostly south of the taiga forest, you will likely be encountering a common yellowthroat. Okay. Next up, we have our raptor for the wetland series. So this is the northern harrier. It's a medium-sized raptor. It's pretty slender overall as far as raptors are concerned. It's got pretty long wings, and it definitely has a long tail. It's got a facial disc, much like an owl. And both sexes, because they do look different in this species, they both show a distinctive white rump in flight. So that area kind of between the tail and the back, that rump area is, this bright white, and that is one of the best identification clues, along with flight and kind of habitat. So the male is this kind of blue-gray overall. So he's, blue-gray above, and he's got a white underwing with dark wingtips and a little bit of dark edging on the flight feathers. The head from underneath, you can see, still has some of that kind of blue-grayish coloration. And these guys will, cruise and fly really low over wetlands and open plains kind of habitat, usually sticking fairly close to, wetlands or flying in between them. They'll actually nest in wetland habitats. So this is truly a marsh species, and, you'll often see it flying low, right along a wetland or right along a ridgeline, and that can be pretty distinctive. There isn't too many things that are going to have that similar kind of flight pattern and behavior, especially when you combine it with those long wings, long tail, and that bright white rump patch. Because they fly so low, you actually get really good looks at the tops of these raptors. Most other raptors, you don't get to see that as often in flight. Usually they're way above you. Only if they're kind of soaring at a distance do you get those looks. But the harriers are much more obliging that way, in that they like to cruise low to the ground. So here's the female for comparison. She's brown above. She's got a fairly, heavily barred underwing, and from below you can see her dark head still as well. So the dark head is going to contrast with the lighter underparts. But again, that bright white rump patch, long tail, and that low cruising to the ground behavior is going to be your dead giveaway. I've actually come across a nest of a harrier before while I was doing wetland bird surveys, and just it was kind of incredible to see the little young guys hanging out. Literally, it was just moist kind of wetland soil area and this trampled down area of cattails to sort of form a nest. And they'll bring sticks and they'll travel with stuff as well, and build it up a little bit, but it was quite the sight to behold. Northern harriers have a wide distribution. Unfortunately, if you are in Newfoundland, you won't be seeing this species, but pretty much anywhere else, at some point in the year, you'll be seeing northern harriers in North America. Okay, now we have two tern species that we're going to be covering, and I want to preface this by saying these two terns are difficult to separate, and it is not always possible. It's not always possible for experts. It is certainly not always possible for beginners. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about these two species, and don't get discouraged, because there's a lot of times when I'm out birding or doing a survey and you just don't have enough of a good look. The lighting is terrible, the bird is far away, or it only hangs around briefly, and you can't tell which species it is, and that's okay. If you want to enter that in on a survey, you can still consider it a complete survey. You can put down common Forster tern, because it is a tough one to tell apart. So now that I've prefaced that with that caveat, let's get into trying to tease these two species apart. So we're going to be looking, of course, here at breeding plumage, but just know that there is other plumages other times of year, and actually these guys are easier to tell apart in the wintering grounds than they are in the breeding season. So terns overall, they're related to gulls. They have these long, pointier wings. They're like the sleeker cousin to the gulls. They've got nice, long, pointed bills, nice, long, pointed wings, and nice, long tails. So this is a medium-sized white tern with a nice black cap, slender wings. It does have a forked tail, and both sexes in this species are going to have a reddish bill with a dark tip. That reddish can be tough to tell apart from the next one we're going to talk about. Black cap. But the thing to pay attention to if you're looking at, a flying bird, a flying tern, is the upper parts. And if the gray on the wing is similar, throughout the whole wing, and is similar to the color of the back of the tern. So a lot of terns will show a dark wedge depending on where they're at in their molt cycle. But overall, this is kind of a similar gray color. This whole wing is a similar gray. Like I said, there's variable dark that can be shown in the primaries, but overall, these primaries are a little bit darker. One subtle marker is that there is a gray belly, but this can be incredibly tough to see, because if you're looking at this flying bird, where do you think the shadow of the sun is going to be to look for a pale gray? It's going to be shadowed. So it can be incredibly difficult to use that as a marker, sometimes useful on perched birds. And it's kind of one of those, if you get it in just the right angle at just the right lighting, you can go, aha, a gray belly. But a lot of the time, that's not something that you're actually going to be able to use. It can be too subtle for the most part. So you're going to be really looking for that similar contrasting gray from the back all the way through, all of the top of the wing here past that little wrist bend in the bird's wing. The tail, if you do manage to snap a photo or somehow, get a good look. And I don't even know if I would trust myself in binoculars with this. This might just be more for something if you happen to be a bird photographer. The tail, sometimes you can see these dark outer feathers just on that end tail, on those feathers there, a little bit of dark on the outside edge. The next term we're going to cover is going to have dark on the inside edge. Can be super subtle. But subtlety is the name of the game between these two species. So that other similar species is the Forster's tern, medium white tern, about the same size, maybe slightly larger, but impossible to tell in flight. It's also going to have slender wings and a forked tail. The bill is going to be more of an orange color, but this can range into the orangey red color. And again, I picked some pretty reasonable photos here, but in a lot of lighting, it's really tough to tell just by bill color alone between the two. So again, maybe if you have great lighting, you get a good photo or something, then that orange bill can be really helpful. But a lot of the time it can be tough to tell apart. It also has a black cap. And here's the thing, for this species, the back and kind of like this part of the wing contrasts with the gray on the area past the wrist. So these are going to be more silvery looking primaries, and there's going to be a fair bit more contrast, on the gray past the wrist. So you can really see it well in this photo here, that back contrasting with the much lighter feathers as you go towards the wingtip. Again, that can be quite subtle, and there are lots of terns that I can't identify in flight because you just don't have good enough look at it. So don't stress yourself out too much. They do show a clean white belly, but again, this is often shadowed, and this image does a great job of that. You might be tempted to call that gray, not realizing that that is simply a shadow. And if you were trying to tell, oh, is that gray in there, and that was your only field marker, you would be having a tough time. So I don't myself tend to rely on that belly color unless it happens to fly, at just the right angle and getting really good light on it close to me. So I use it more as a supporting factor than anything else. The tail overall is more gray than in the common tern. So it's going to be, a little bit darker looking on the tail. And you can see it a little bit in some of these photos. The dark on the tail feather is on the inside, not the outside leading edge. But again, that can be fairly subtle. Even if you're looking at this photo, it can be kind of confusing to determine, okay, well, is the black on the outside or the inside? It kind of looks like both because of the way the feathers are being held. So just keep those things in mind. This is one of those species where you're going to want to be gathering as many clues as you can to try to figure out the identification. And if you're pretty new to birding, just don't worry about it. It's okay. You'll get there. This is a pair of species that, I need to go over every spring because, which species checks off all of these things is something that, my brain forgets about over the winter. So I need to refresh every spring as well. So just keep that in mind. There's some circles highlighting that kind of paler area on the wing past the wrist as you get to the tip. And it can be a little bit of dark edging on some of the feathers as well, but that tends to be kept more to the, the edge here. However, the one thing that is a little bit easier to do is telling these two species apart when they're perched. And conveniently, those kind of darker flight feathers on the common tern put all together on the perched bird usually look quite a fair bit darker, especially compared to the rest of the bird. So if you're looking at the back, you're taking a look at those wingtips there, and those are actually those leading primary feathers folded up. So you're looking at your wingtip there, and it is going to be a fair bit darker than the upper part of the bird. On gulls and terns, we call this the mantle. So that is one little key feature there. On the Forster's tern, those lighter primaries are just going to look silvery gray all put together, and that's going to contrast, lighter compared to the rest of the bird's wing. So that upper back, that wing, that kind of mantle area. The other thing that you can't tell while the bird is flying is that The Forster's tern has a longer tail than the common tern. And this is useful because on the perched bird, the common tern's tail is going to be either, somewhere at the wingtip length or a fair bit below it. So it's not going to extend past the point of the wings when they're all folded up nice. The Forster's tern, that tail is going to extend past those wingtips. So if you can keep that in mind, you might have pretty decent luck telling those two species apart if you find them perched. Again, that red on the bill can be tough to tell at a distance. They also have slightly different calls, but there can be a little bit of overlap. Both common and foresters can do more of a single noted keer, but the common tern not always, but one of the calls it does is more of a two-parted keer, which the foresters doesn't do. So let's play the keer. So that's like a two-parted call, whereas the Forster's does more of a descending keer. So subtle, I'll play it again. Keer. That's the kind of subtlety that, you would get better at if you spend a lot of time around terns. And if you happen to see these two birds perched side by side for some odd reason, you would notice that the Forster's tern has longer legs and the common tern has shorter legs, and that is apparent when the two birds are side by side. You tend to see a little bit more of that knee, that little kind of kneecap bulge here on the Forster's tern versus the common tern, but I wouldn't use that necessarily as an ID feature, but it is something that I have noticed a little bit of. So if you see the two species together, the Forster's tern is going to look a fair bit taller because it has longer legs. And here it is, the Forster's tern at a little bit more of a distance, just to show you that, yes, you can still see that paler primaries compared to the rest of the darker mantle at a distance. And again, that nice long tail on the bird. Looking at the upper wing again, comparing the two, the common tern, that gray is going to be, looking the same. It's not going to contrast. It's just going to be that similar gray tone throughout from the back all the way, past the wrist. Whereas in the Forster's tern, you're going to have a darker mantle and it's going to get eventually paler as you get to the wingtip. So you can see this kind of blurry distant shot of the common tern on the left side here. And you can see that, that upper part just looks really consistently gray. The bill is a dark red on the common and more orangey toned on the Forsters if you see them close enough and you get them in good light. Again, the gray belly on the common versus the white belly on the Foresters, but keeping in mind that that can be tough to tell. The common tern has a very large distribution. It is a fair bit grayer in kind of the Eurasian distribution. Ours are a little bit paler. It's not quite as a dark gray as we have here, but let's zoom into our North American context and we'll see them not really head west of the Rockies, but you'll see them east of the Rockies in a fair number of locations. And the Forster's tern, this is definitely more of a kind of central western species. You'll get them a little bit in southern Ontario. When I was doing work around Long Point, we actually discovered a Forster's tern colony. And that's one other thing I should mention, that both of these species are colonial nesters. So they will nest in large colonies. Forster's tern tends to like wetland habitats a little bit more, whereas the common tern will be found in maybe a slightly wider variety of habitats, but both of them can nest in fairly similar locations. Islands, muskrat lodges, I've seen common tern nests on. So it is a species that will, nest kind of in a group, but they will forage a long way for food. So you can see them in many, many locations, and they might be coming a long way in search of food. Phew. Hopefully that wasn't too overwhelming. Got two more species for you. So first up is the Willet, and this is a fairly large shorebird that's going to be hanging around, the Great Plains all summer long. It's got a dark straight bill. It's got long, dull gray legs. Um, One of the shorebirds that you might see lingering into the spring, and then some of the early migrants are called yellowlegs, and as the name suggests, they have bright yellow legs. However, the willet, who is going to be here all season and actually breeds here, has these dull gray legs. So both sexes, they're going to be this mottled gray overall, definitely a cool toned bird. It's going to have a pale little eye ring. It's not a very bold one, but it is there. But the thing is that they'll show this bright, flash of, bold black and white coloration in their wings, and they will get up and fly, especially if they see you, because they are very, very vocal. They're kind of aggressive, and they will let you know that they do not want you there. And there means their wetland or anywhere near their wetland. I've been hounded by many, many, many a willet. They're kind of tenacious. And this is one of those species that says its name. So it can do variations of willet, 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 or it can do the whole pill will willet, pill will willet. So we'll play a couple of those here for you now. But if you've ever, walked up to a prairie pothole wetland, chances are you've kicked up a willet, and it will fly around you and it will yell at you a fair bit, and it will be saying willet a fair bit. Oops. Let's, there we go. And they'll just kind of do that ad nauseum, very loudly, close to you. That's the shorter call. That's more the willet, 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 willet. So very vocal, very active. I'll play the pill will willet call for you again here. They get very agitated when you're nearby, and they'll even follow you to the next wetland if you're going to go look at another one. Ask me how I know. For diet, they're walking steady. They're going to be picking stuff out of, wet areas, muddy areas. They'll swish, they'll pick, they'll probe for food, and like a lot of slightly larger birds, they'll kind of eat anything that they can get in their bills. So they'll eat insects, crustaceans, mollusks. If they're wintering in coastal areas, they'll eat polychaete worms. They'll eat small fish, and as the photo is showing you here, they'll even snack on amphibians if they can get a hold of them. But overall, gray bird, dull wings, kind of this long, dull bill that's straight, and this really bold black and white wing. You wouldn't expect, kind of a drab looking bird to have such a bold flash to their wing, but it does, and it's quite beautiful. And like I said, they do tend to get up and start calling, so you will have a chance to see this kind of wing pattern. And their little guys are pretty cute, as you can see in the bottom right hand corner here. Most shorebird babies are just absolutely adorable. They often look like cotton balls with toothpicks for legs, and they just, they're precocial, so they hatch, they dry off, and they start running around and trying to feed. So they're pretty cute. And that's what they're trying to protect. So you'll find eastern willets and western willets. There are slight differences in the population, but overall they look fairly similar. In the west, you'll find them in the Great Plains, and in the east, they're far more coastal. And overall, they winter in coastal areas. Zoom in here to the North American context so you can get a closer peek at that, but you'll definitely see them if you come visit the Northern Great Plains. And last but not least, the marbled godwit. This is another quite large shorebird. It has a rather long upturned bill, which is bicolor. So it's kind of this pinky orange. Some individuals show more pink, some individuals show more orange, but it's always kind of that lighter color towards the head, and it's got a dark, kind of second half of it towards the tip. Got long, kind of dark or black legs, and it's got a fairly large, chunky body. This is a large-bodied shorebird. Both sexes look similar. and they're going to be mottled brown and cinnamon tones. They're going to be much more warmer colored. So, it won't be uncommon if you're out on a prairie wetland to see marbled godwits and willets together. And, you might think, oh, large shorebirds are going to be tough to tell apart. They're really, the difference in color is that kind of warmer tones to the marbled godwit and the cooler tones to the willet. That's usually one of the first things that I clue in on. It's like, oh, a cooler looking bird versus a warmer looking bird. Then the bill really gives it away. It's quite long, that slight upturn to it for the marbled godwit, that two-toned look to it as well. So they have a little bit of a dark cap, bit of that dark eye line, a little bit of a pale face. And when they fly, their underwings are mostly cinnamon. So that warm tone is kind of turned up when the bird is flying. So definitely those much more warm cinnamony tones in the wing. And I'll also have a cinnamon patch on the upper wing. This is another one that is going to be quite vocal, quite agitated if you are near anywhere near its preferred breeding habitat, and that could be, quite a distance away. I've definitely had godwits come visit me from 300 meters away because they saw me at a distance. So they're going to come fly and yell at me for a little bit while I'm doing grassland surveys. And they do nest in the upland in the grassland areas. So they feed in wetlands, but they do nest further upland. And like I said, this is another one that's quite vocal when it's alarmed, and it will do versions of Godwit, sometimes just God, sometimes the whole Godwit, and sometimes it'll just be, slowly Godwit, Godwit. Sometimes it Godwit, 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 but it always does that kind of Godwit in some sort of variation. So let's take a listen. That sounds kind of ridiculous to me. And they do get, like I said, they get quite upset from a long distance away. And I think, they just want to let everyone know that, hey, there might be a predator around. So in this instance, it's starting off with a few of the God, 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 Godwit, Godwit. I'll play it again instead of imitating. And that's the marbled Godwit call. Quite loud, quite raucous, often gets worse. Josh says he thinks he has PTSD from getting mobbed by marbled godwits. Yes. The last time I was out doing grassland surveys down south of Lake Alma, I was getting dive bombed by both godwits and willets, and they were taking turns, flying just low and level with me and straight at me and then veering off. And I'm sure that I was nowhere near their nest. They're just very, very uppity. And like I said, if you're out, you're doing a survey and you happen to be going from pond to pond, they will follow you and they will make it so that any other godwits or willets in the vicinity are well aware that you're there, and then they can take up the torch and continue to harass you. They're cool birds, but you will know that they're there. They will let it be known. This is another one that walks steadily, probes around, picks for food. It eats a lot of grasshoppers, interestingly enough. So insects, but does feast on a fair bit of grasshoppers, which makes sense. It does spend a bunch of time in upland habitats as well. It also eats aquatic plant tubers, leeches, and small fish. Like I said, a lot of these bigger shorebirds will just kind of eat whatever they come across opportunistically. And that goes for a lot of critters, especially, things that you think might be strictly vegetarian, like deer. A lot of them will take a protein snack when they can get it. So, just keep that in mind. Lots of things will eat anything that's kind of got a bit of protein in it that's easy to digest. As I've mentioned before, this is going to be a bird you'll find in areas with a mix of native prairie and wetlands of different type in it for different kinds of feeding. You can see that cinnamony patch on the kind of drooping folded wing here, that nice kind of dark edge to it. They're a gorgeous bird, which is, I guess, good because it keeps them in my good graces. I just think they're handsome, but I do wish that they would stop yelling loudly at me most of the time. So comparing her to the marbled Godwit and the Willet, warmer tones for the Godwit, cooler tones overall for the Willet. That bill is going to be a pretty dead giveaway for the marbled Godwit. It's going to be two-toned. It's going to be fairly long. Be a slight upturn to it. Sometimes, depending on the angle, the upturn is kind of, it's subtle. It's not like a, elephant trunk sticking upward or anything, but, it does have a bit of that upturn to it and that bicoloredness. The Willet, shorter bill overall, and it, just because it's shorter, it kind of appears thicker overall, but dark. It's going to have kind of these dull legs in flight, which, like I mentioned, you will get the chance to see these birds fly and you'll get to see their wings quite well. The Willet is going to be flashing that kind of black and white wing pattern, where the marbled Godwit is really going to start just flashing some cinnamon warm tones at you. It's quite beautiful. It's a gorgeous color. You don't often get to see, quite that reddish cinnamon color on a bird. So those are the two, marbled Godwit and Willet. Marbled Godwit is definitely, for the most part, a northern Great Plains specialist. Interestingly enough, though, you'll find them, up in the James Bay area, which is kind of interesting that they're not in places in between. And some of those things always make you wonder. It's like, well, birds have wings and they wind up in strange places. So, maybe that's how that happened. A few of them got blown off course somehow and wound up there and thought it was good enough to come back to. Who knows? But I always find, those little quirks of a species range to be quite interesting. And, we don't often have answers for them. We can speculate, but we don't know for certain what happens always. And that's it. Those are our birds today. I know we tackled a couple of, similar looking species, but hopefully with some of the tricks that you've learned today, you'll be feeling a bit more confident telling them apart. That Marsh Wren and the Sedge Wren, the Marsh Wren is going to be, just plainer brown, richer color overall, and that white eyebrow is going to be contrasting with the rest of the face. Sedge Wren is really going to look quite, straw colored, a fair bit more barred, plain faced overall, but they're both going to be small little active birds that stick their tail up and they're going to sing a lot. One thing I didn't mention is that marsh wrens will do a little bit of a flight display sometimes. You don't often get to see it, but sometimes they'll kind of fly up as they're singing and they'll kind of, flutter their wings and drop as they're singing. So sometimes you might get to see that, but it's not something that you see terribly frequently always. So let's go over that variable kind of gurgling rattle for the marsh wren again. And, busy, busy, busy. You're going to hear, if there's marsh wrens in an area, you're just going to be hearing them most times of the day. The sedge wren is going to be harsher, it's going to have those intro notes, and it's going to be a, kind of a sewing machine-like rattle. And again, just remember there can be overlap in these two habitats, but marsh wrens tend to be found more in deeper water wetlands with stands of cattail and bulrush. Sedge wrens tend to be found in kind of those shallower, margins of those wetlands, or just shallow wetlands overall. The common yellowthroat, it's our cute little warbler with the bandit mask, and it's going to be singing that witchy, 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 witch, or witchity, 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 witchity in the wetlands or in the kind of shrubs surrounding the wetlands. And it can be kind of subtle. It's one of those things that I find I easily overlook when I'm listening for birds in a wetland. So just pay attention if you're hearing any, just check in and go, am I hearing any witchity, witchity, witchities? And give it a scan. And our northern harrier, a kind of long-winged, long-tailed raptor that soars low and cruises over those low wetlands and going to have that white rump patch, whether it's the male that's going to be more blue-gray with dark wingtips, or if it's going to be our kind of more brownish barred-looking female, both of them are going to show that white patch on the rump. Our two terns, quite similar. If you're not feeling up to identifying the terns, don't worry too much about it. The common tern, when perched, is going to have those darker wingtips and a shorter tail than those wingtips project out. The Forster's tern is going to have silvery primaries when perched, and it's going to have a much longer tail that's going to project past those wingtips. In flight, the common tern is going to have, a consistent look to the color of the back in terms of where the gray is. It can have a variable dark wedge, and the Forsters can show a bit of dark as well, but that kind of consistent gray over the back versus the lightening of the upper color of the Forster's tern. So the Forster's tern is going to have a darker back, and it's going to get lighter as you get close to the wingtip. Vocally, the common tern does a keer, keer. It also can do shorter single notes, but that keer is definitely a common tern thing. Versus just the descending keer of the Forster's tern. And our two large agitated shorebirds, the Willet and the marbled Godwit. The Willet, especially in flight, is going to be flashing that bold black and white wing pattern. It's going to have that dark long bill, whereas the marbled Godwit is going to have those lovely cinnamon tones in the wing and a longer bicolored bill. And both of them will say their name to kind of different degrees and, different variations thereof. So we can do some Willet, Willet, Willets and some Pill-Will Willets. And then shorter, Willet, 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 Willet. And the marbled Godwit. This one does a fair bit of God, 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 and Godwit, Godwit. It also sounds a little bit more desperate to me. It just sounds a little bit crazed, a little bit desperate. Okay, that's it for the species that we're covering in this session. I hope I demystified a little bit some of those common, species that really look similar to one another. So here's my contact information. You can reach out to Birds Canada on all of the socials. And I just want to say a big thank you to our supporters, the Manitoba Fish and Wildlife Enhancement Fund, as well as the Government of Canada for supporting this work.